Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to an EAS Consulting Group webinar on Listeria monocytogenes in ice cream and frozen novelties, presented by EAS independent consultant, Dr. Kathy Knutson. EAS, a member of the certified family of companies, is a leader in regulatory solutions for industries regulated by FDA. Our global network of over 200 independent advisors and consultants enables EAS to provide comprehensive consulting, training, and auditing services, ensuring proactive regulatory compliance. From regulatory strategy development, compliance assistance with food safety and HACCP, preparation of technical submissions such as GRAS, food contact notifications, as well as support for receipt of FDA Form 483s, warning letters, and preparing for FDA inspections, EAS offers the detailed knowledge and experience your company needs to ensure accurate and timely assistance. Today's presenter is EAS independent consultant, Dr. Kathy Knutson. Kathy Knutson, PhD, is a microbiologist and certified lead instructor for preventive controls for qualified individuals through the Food Safety Preventive Controls Alliance. She consults with companies in meeting FSMA requirements, including manufacturers in the cannabis industry, as she educates on issues surrounding cannabis-infused food products for sale in states with medical and recreational use legislation. Kathy has a PhD in food science from the University of Minnesota, and prior to consulting, worked as a food safety educator and proficiency program coordinator with the Northland Laboratories. With that, I will say thank you very much again for joining us, and I'll turn the presentation over to Kathy.
Thank you, Jessica. And Jessica is new with EAS, and so she's still learning that my last name is Knutson, so we do pronounce the K. And given our audience, I want to make sure that everybody has that correct pronunciation. So thank you, Jessica. Thank you to EAS Consulting for this opportunity to present the webinar to Food Safety News, our partner partnering with EAS Consulting Group. So the name of the webinar is Listeria monocytogenes in ice cream and frozen novelties. Let me go to my next slide. For this webinar, my objectives are to describe the origin of recalls of dairy products for Listeria monocytogenes, to describe Listeria species and listeriosis, to analyze outbreak inspection and recall data, to describe steps in the control of Listeria monocytogenes. And so my introduction, Jessica did a great job of just giving you a brief introduction to me. I have spent a lot of my years in the professional area of education. I was a high school teacher, a college teacher. I also was the outreach manager at what is now called IFISH, which is Institute for Food Safety and Health. And so education is big, big, big on my agenda. And I love doing these webinars for EAS. And for the last 6.5 years, I have been a consultant. And as a consultant, I have been in facilities doing risk assessment investigations. I have been doing recall investigations, looking for the source of either Listeria or Salmonella, depending on what the recall pathogen was. And I personally have taken thousands of swabs over the last 6.5 years and been in multiple facilities, too numerous to count at this time. But I also want to take you back to 1985. In 1985, I was a graduate student at University of Wisconsin-Madison. My major professor was Dr. Mary Kay Wagner, and I was doing research on microwave heating of raw milk for pasteurization. And that was the year that we learned about the Listeria monocytogenes outbreak from Hispanic style cheese in California, in the Los Angeles area. It was the Jalisco Cheese Company. And it was a really interesting scenario in that women who became ill with listeriosis were often the majority of them were going to a community clinic, and it became obvious to a local epidemiologist that there was a spike in Listeria monocytogenes. There were infant deaths and fetal deaths that were associated with this outbreak. And this year in 1985 is really when the spotlight started to shine on the dairy industry. And it continues today with recalls and outbreaks of cheese and other dairy products due to the contamination of Listeria monocytogenes. And then the next year, my second year in my master's program, Dr. Wagner had left and I was under the direction of Dr. Elmer Marth. And Dr. Marth's graduate students, my peers, were doing research already on Listeria monocytogenes. So Dr. Elliot Reiser was making cheese that had Listeria monocytogenes in it, and then tracking the ability of Listeria monocytogenes to either grow or to die over the aging process. And then I recently had a phone call conversation with him. Dr. Reiser has recently retired from Michigan State University, and he is the author, along with our former professor, Dr. Marth, of the book that I have listed on the bottom here, Listeria, Listeriosis, and Food Safety, which he now is working on the 4th edition of that. The first edition was published in 1980. No, excuse me, 1990. 1990 was the first edition. And so when we were talking, he told me that the first outbreak in 1986 was not the ice cream novelty that I had focused on and remembered from that time of 1986, but instead there was another company that had dairy products that had to be recalled, and there was an outbreak in May of 1986. But those of you who have been around like I have, you may remember in July of 1986, there was the recall of a chocolate coated ice cream novelty. So this was a square of vanilla ice cream that was coated in chocolate, and then it was wrapped in a foil lining or liner, excuse me. And that really put the ice cream industry, the frozen novelty industry, on high alert. And people started doing a lot of research in the area of Listeria, a lot more research. Dr. Marth and his students were already doing research at that time. And under research, when I was talking to Dr. Reiser, I remembered being in the laboratory, so in Dr. Marth's laboratory, and somebody, probably Dr. Reiser, opened up a refrigerator. And in that refrigerator were very large Erlenmeyer flasks that had enrichment broth in them and samples of cheese. So probably it was Dr. Reiser that opened up the refrigerator. And I remember just being stunned by this image of multiple flasks in this refrigerator. They were at least 2 liters, if not 3 to 5 liters in size. And that was because at that time in 1986, the method of trying to find Listeria monocytogenes started out with a cold enrichment, literally at refrigeration temperature. And he told me 6 to 8 weeks of an enrichment step to start out the testing for the Listeria monocytogenes at that time. Here we have our foundational information about Listeria species. There are now 26 species that have been identified. The last group of species were identified at Cornell University by the laboratory of Dr. Martin Weidman. All Listeria are gram-positive rods. When you look at them in the microscope, they primarily are occurring single. They are catalase positive, oxidase negative. They are facultative anaerobes, which means that Listeria monocytogenes will grow better in the presence of oxygen through respiration, but it does grow in the absence of oxygen as well, but slower. So refrigeration will have slower growth. Listeria is a non-spore former. It has characteristic tumbling motility, characteristic tumbling motility when motile. Not all Listeria are motile, and not all Listeria monocytogenes are motile. And as a gram-positive microorganism, it is closely related to Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, and Lactobacillus, which are significant in the food industry from fermentation standpoint, food safety standpoint, and spoilage as well. Now, more specific about Listeria monocytogenes. So they're among those 26 species of Listeria. Listeria monocytogenes is considered the human pathogen. So think of it as 1 out of 26. By the time I get to the end of the material, we will have gone through some information where there may be other species that are pathogenic. It is rare. The other species are more associated with animal illness or with a very high risk population that is infants. Back to Listeria monocytogenes, it is associated with raw milk. It is associated with wet processing environments. So in the dairy industry, there's a big difference between an ice cream facility or a cheese facility compared to a spray dry operation. On the spray dry side, we want that to remain dry. And so our primary pathogen of concern there is Salmonella, where in the dairy industry, in all of the wet processing areas, our primary pathogen of concern is Listeria monocytogenes. And then that very unique characteristic among pathogens is the ability to grow at refrigeration. And so anything below room temperature in terms of being a wet processing environment is going to be a very good environment for Listeria monocytogenes. And then in our products that are refrigerated, there is the potential for Listeria monocytogenes to grow during the shelf life of that product. And then in terms of our commercially frozen food, the temperature of commercially frozen food is too cold to allow the growth of Listeria monocytogenes, but Listeria monocytogenes will survive in frozen food very nicely. And that has been a big problem with our frozen vegetable industry and the potential for Listeria monocytogenes there. In terms of the illness, Listeriosis starts out with a primary infection and a primary illness, which is very flu-like. And so we have there will be the development of a fever, body aches. There is the potential for vomiting. There is the potential for diarrhea. And the person who is suffering from listeriosis is probably going to miss a day or two of work. But those of you, I should say, because I'm not in this category, those of you who have a robust immune system will be able to fight off Listeria quite easily. And that primary infection is, of course, in the intestine. And so for someone like me, I'm immunocompromised, so I am high risk for listeriosis due to immune disease, illness that I have, I can't think of the right word right now. Sorry about that. And also because of medication that I take, which is immunosuppressive. And then, those of us who are at higher risk for listeriosis, there can be the development of secondary infections. And that is when Listeria crosses from the intestine into the blood system, and the person would have sepsis. Once the bacteria are in the blood system, then of course the whole circulatory system is going to carry the bacteria throughout the body. And then in my bullet notes below, I have examples of secondary illnesses due to infections of different parts of the body. And what's really significant about Listeria monocytogenes is that it has the ability to cross membranes and cross barriers that other pathogens don't have. And the first one is the blood-brain brain barrier. I always start at the top of the body here, and therefore there can be the development of meningitis or encephalitis. And in the dairy industry, when our cows get infected with listeriosis, it is called circling disease. And that is because of the effect on the brain. The brain is infected, and the cow cannot stand upright properly. They lean, and when they walk in a circle. The next one is into the eye, which causes conjunctivitis. We have the crossing of Listeria into organs within the body, such as the heart, which would be endocarditis. And one paper that I found showed a rate of 8% of patients who get listeriosis will have an infection of the heart, endocarditis. And then, of course, the very sad one that gives us all pause, and that is Listeria's ability to cross the placental barrier. And this can happen at any point in pregnancy. So there can be fetal death, there can be a stillborn delivery, or there can be a newborn neonatal death as well. And the woman who's carrying the baby is also ill, in addition to the effects on the infant. So this is a compilation of data, which, hold on just a second here. There we go. Okay, just need to check my notes. So we're going to look at listeriosis mortality rate. So far what I've talked about in terms of unique characteristics of Listeria, it's able to grow at refrigeration temperature, it's able to cross barriers and linings within the body, which are not meant to be crossed. And now what we're looking at is the mortality rate. And the mortality rate is given typically in percentage, and it is for a given outbreak, what was the number of people where there were deaths compared to the total number of people. And one of the unique characteristics of Listeria monocytogenes is, and listeriosis as the illness, is that it has a very high mortality rate. And of course, we can use statistics in any way to tell the story that we want to tell, but we'll take a look at some of these examples. This is data that comes directly from the CDC. Specifically, however, it is a list from CDC of multi-state outbreaks. So this is not the entire list. We do have some high-risk foods represented here. So in my work as a consultant, very often I will be asked, is my facility going to be inspected? And if you are manufacturing a high-risk food, or if you are manufacturing a food for a high-risk population, then you are at greater risk of having your facility be inspected. It's all about probability. FDA doesn't tell us where they're going or their priorities in a given year in terms of what types of facilities are going to be inspected. I'll give you some data that'll help you figure that out. But here, let me focus on our data chart. This is an Excel spreadsheet. And so we start with the last fiscal year, and I'm sorry, we start with the calendar year. So this is the calendar year for 2022, not the fiscal year. And in 2022, we have 2 multi-state outbreaks of Listeria monocytogenes. And so the data are starting at the top with the most recent multi-state outbreaks. In terms of looking at the ice cream outbreak, we'll talk a little bit more about the current one, 2022. There are officially 25 cases of listeriosis. There has been 1 death of a woman from Illinois, and in addition, there has been a fetal death as well. Then as you look through the list, going down to my second green arrow down at 2015, what you see is some of the high risk foods for Listeria monocytogenes, to include things like the packaged salads, so leafy greens potentially. We have deli meats. We of course have more cheeses in terms of dairy industry. Down in 2016, we see the frozen vegetables. And then we get to 2015, where there was an outbreak from soft cheeses. And then there was the famous Blue Bell ice cream outbreak, which had 10 cases and 3 deaths associated with it. But we do see a lot with the dairy industry being involved with multi-state outbreaks. And then if you look at my darker green rows on the bottom, the 2022 data down to 2012 showed a percentage of 14% mortality rate. Then if you look at the outbreak from cantaloupes in 2011, there were 33 deaths. And so that brings us up to an average, just for this data, of 16%. So it moved the needle a little bit to a greater mortality rate, but not a huge difference, even though that outbreak was very significant. And so when I'm teaching about Listeria monocytogenes, I will tell my classes that Listeria has a mortality rate of approximately 20% for a given outbreak. And again, looking at the statistics, we can look at an individual outbreak and do the statistics. If you go to 2016 here and the raw milk, there were 2 cases and 1 death. So that was a 50% mortality rate. So looking at the average of this data is a little bit more helpful, but the main point is that listeriosis has a very high and a very significant mortality rate. And when we look at the people who do die from Listeria, they typically fall into one of these high risk populations. And I listed them in this way for a very significant reason: the young, the old, the pregnant, and the immunocompromised, because that forms an acronym, which is YOPI. And I don't hear YOPI said very much, but I learned about the acronym a few years ago, and it's really helped me to focus. And so when we're talking about the young and when we're talking about the old, with the young, it's the development of the immune system and the ability, or not having the ability, to fight off a Listeria infection. And with the elderly, it's a diminished immune system response. And so they also do not have the strong ability to fight off that primary Listeria infection. Pregnancy, immunocompromised pregnancy, and then any situation that puts people into the immunocompromised scenario, such as surgery, any pre-existing conditions. If Listeria monocytogenes comes along and their immune system is already weakened, then they are at high risk, along with our pregnant people as well. So here's the question, which I already asked: will my facility be inspected? And if you are in the dairy industry and if you have a high-risk food such as ice cream, frozen novelties, and I would include cheese in that as well, yes. The answer is absolutely yes. You need to be prepared for both state and federal inspections at your facilities. But then to answer that question more, and especially in the future, this is me putting on my educator hat, and I want you to be able to have information and data that will help you answer this question and help you be more thinking globally in terms of the risk that your facility is at. And so I encourage you to follow the Listeria monocytogeny outbreaks that are announced by the CDC. So you can go to cdc.gov, look for outbreaks. You can do a search for Listeria monocytogenes, and it is always educational to see what other industries are going through Listeria outbreaks, And then, of course, anything in the dairy industry as well, and keep yourself educated on those outbreaks. The same with our FDA recall announcements. You can go to the FDA website and go to the page, which is recalls, market withdrawals, and safety alerts. And there's a way that you can sign up for the announcements coming from FDA on recalls to go directly to your email. Now you get one almost every day, and it's for the entirety of FDA. I haven't figured out yet how to do it just for food, but I highly encourage you to follow the recalls, certainly for the dairy industry, certainly for ice cream and frozen novelties, to find out what happened, what was the reason for the contamination, and then make sure that you're shoring up your own food safety at your own facility. And then also ingredients. Don't forget about the ingredients that are coming into your facility. You want to make sure that if an ingredient manufacturer of an ingredient that you're receiving is going through a recall, or even if it's not a supplier that you are buying from, and they're going through a recall for that particular ingredient, that puts you at higher risk. So any activity under FDA in terms of the type of ingredients that you're receiving and the type of product that you're manufacturing puts you at higher risk for being inspected, and also just puts you at higher risk for public health as well, which is, of course, what it's all about in terms of protecting the consumer. So then going to FDA microbiological surveillance sampling, you can actually Google all these terms and you will land on an FDA page, which is their page noting microbiological surveillance sampling assignments. So FDA can have special assignments on a fiscal year basis, and this year and many of the last years has been on leafy greens, so that doesn't apply to us, but you can look at the other ones from the past. For example, frozen berries. Are you receiving frozen berries? And I believe there was a raw milk one as well. So depending on what your facility is manufacturing, there may be other data from previous years that would apply. And again, that's for the FDA microbiological surveillance sampling, which is a special assignment under FDA. And then the next one, my last bullet here, this full title is the name of a document that was published after the FDA had a special assignment of visiting 89 ice cream production facilities. They started August 1st of 2016 and went into 2017, and then they published this document. So I highly encourage you to get a copy of this report. What you need to know, just kind of as a summary of what happened, they were in 32 states, 89 production facilities, 19 of the 89, and again, this was 2016, 2017, they found Listeria monocytogenes in 19 of the 89. They actually took a total of 5,295 samples, of which 65 of those product samples were found to have Listeria monocytogenes in them as well. And of course, there was a lot of follow-up activity, and that really put the pressure on the ice cream and frozen novelty industries. And the 2016, excuse me, assignment followed the Bluebell ice cream recall and outbreak. Another resource that we have is the FDA dashboard. And so I went to the FDA dashboard to just do a search on inspections, because my question was, how many or how often does FDA do an inspection of an ice cream facility? And I kind of already had a feeling for that personally myself. I have had clients who are ice cream manufacturers. I have had participants in the PCQI training that I deliver that are ice cream manufacturers. And one of them recently told me that after she completed her PCQI training, the week with me, that following Monday, they were expecting FDA in for an inspection. So she was very eager learner for that training. So what I was able to do with the filter, they have choice of product type. So the choice was food/cosmetics. They also have a choice of project area, and I was able to choose foodborne biological hazard. And that gave me a spreadsheet with over 100,000 different entries, each entry being an inspection. And that went all the way back to fiscal year 2009. So the difference in fiscal year, let me just pause on that. The federal calendar year starts on October 1st. So and then goes until September 30th of the next year. And so, for example, with fiscal year 2009, that actually started in 2008. That started on October 1st of 2008, all the way through 2009, September 30th. And you'll see that on more of my slides as well when I talk about the fiscal year. And then in my Excel spreadsheet, I was able to choose ice cream and count the number. And then I was able to choose creamer so that I was getting creamery and creameries, spelled differently, of course. And I will show you the data going back to 2018. I basically did 2 full fiscal years, and our current fiscal year is 2023. So this is the data that popped up. Starting with 2023, which started October 1st, there have not been any inspections of ice cream facilities yet. In 2022, there were 45, and because of the pandemic, we know that FDA was now not out doing as many inspections as they had in the past. And so this is not a total number of inspections into ice cream facilities. This is only the given way that I did the search, just to show you some patterns. So we have in 2022, over 5,000, in 2020 and 2021, over 4,000, and then look at 2018 and 2019, where we're upwards of 8,000 inspections. And so my conclusion from that, hopefully you will agree with me, is we should expect FDA to be doing more inspections. And because we expect FDA to be doing more inspections as the pandemic winds down and we get back to normal levels of inspection, we can expect more ice cream facilities to be inspected. And if you look at the rate of inspection, the data before the pandemic, we were at 0.66, 0.65, then it went drastically down. And then just because of the numbers, we got a little bit higher in terms of rate of inspection, which actually is interesting to me because it gives data to the concept of, it looks like FDA is doing more ice cream, proportionately more ice cream facility inspections than in the past. And I would expect that trend to continue, but it is a limited data set here, even though it was a lot of pieces of data. So that was inspection. So now we're going to look at recall data. And to look at the recall data, I used a different source of information. It is Food Industry Council's Food Recall Reporter, which is the name of their searchable food recall database. And I just want to tell you, it was extremely user-friendly. I was so happy with it. And in order to do the database search, I chose class 1 recalls, FDA, which was a choice, human food, and then Listeria monocytogenes was a choice. And then in terms of typing in, I typed in ice cream. So these only represent what came from this particular database with these search terms. And I got a total of 31 going back to 2014. And so again, these are recalls. And so we see in 2022, this database showed me that there actually have been 3 recalls. Before, when we were looking at the multi-state data, there were only 2. Notice at 2019, there was 0, which was interesting. Otherwise, 1 and 2 is very popular, except for 2016. So there was a lot of activity in 2016. There were 12 different sites that went through a recall in 2016. In 2015, there were 2, including Bluebell, and then 2014, there were 8, which actually was interesting data. Not quite sure why, can't explain that one. So now we're jumping back to CDC data. And specifically, this is for the Bluebell Creameries outbreak and recall that was initiated in 2015. And let me go through my bullets and then I'll go to the chart. So of interest is that Bluebell Creameries has the record of the 2nd highest fine ever ordered by the Department of Justice at $19.35 million in 2020. As an aside, the number 1 spot goes to Chipotle, which also was in 2020 and was over $20 million. And one of the things I recently learned, those of you who are in the legal area and regulatory affairs area, you may already have known this, but at the federal level, there is a statute of limitation of 5 years for most legal cases. And that's what we're going to see in the timeline to the right. And that is significant because there is the ability to match Listeria monocytogenes from a facility or from a product, and then to a patient isolate, and know that FDA can go back 5 years. The type of cases that do not stick to that 5-year statute of limitations is things like terrorism and just really, really high crime. So here in the realm of FDA, we are pretty confident that we can stick to the 5-year timeline. And then the other thing that happened this year is there was a trial of the Bluebell Creameries president, that is the man who was president at the time in 2015, and that ended in a mistrial. And part of this is sobering from the company perspective, in that there can be fines and there can be prison potentially. And we see that with other outbreaks of Listeria monocytogenes. In terms of the timeline for Bluebell ice cream, what I first want to show you is actually the x-axis, and this is the number of cases. So the number of people infected with the outbreak strain of Listeria monocytogenes, and it started in January of 2010 with 1 person. Then we jumped to 2011 with 2, 2012 with 1. So at this point, there were 4 cases. In order for CDC to say that there is an outbreak, the definition of an outbreak is 2 or more people, so 2 or more cases, with the resulting illness, so in this case, listeriosis, from the same food. So in order to prove that this is an outbreak, there had to be the association with the food. Then we jumped to 2014, where there were 2, until October, which there were 3, and then January of 2015, there was an additional case as well. And that should add up to 10. This picture is from the CDC website. The website is down below in the lower right-hand corner. So I want to make sure that you understand that this is CDC data. And then there also is a CDC final update for the Bluebell Creameries report, the information about it, and that is cited in the lower left-hand corner for you. And what is fascinating about this outbreak to me is that there were 3 different processing facilities. So if we start on the far right-hand side, you see there's the factory icon for Alabama. Then we go to the central United States. The red icon is for the Oklahoma facility, and the blue factory icon is for the Texas facility. And there were not cases associated with the ice cream that was manufactured in Alabama, but there were cases that were associated with ice cream manufactured in both Oklahoma and in Texas. And I just want to give you a little background on one of the reasons why this outbreak occurred. And that is one of the products that Bluebell was manufacturing was called scoops. And it was an individual scoop of ice cream that was frozen. And these were sold into food service. And some of the cases were people in the hospital. So they already had something going on. They're hospitalized. So they're going through some kind of a situation where they probably have a weakened immune system, and they wanted an ice cream shake. And they ordered a shake from the cafeteria and were served a shake that unfortunately did have Listeria, is associated with Listeria monocytogenes in that ice cream. Very unusual situation, but it does bring home the point that you need to know who your customers are. I very often work with large manufacturing facilities where they are selling out into the world and they do not know who the customers are. For most of us, we have distribution chains where the ice cream is, or the novelty is going to go into the general population. If you think about frozen novelties on a stick, think of the population of the very young, and they have a greater risk of developing listeriosis because of being young. And then if you know that you're selling your product into school cafeterias or into hospital cafeterias, that puts your population at higher risk. And then I had the question, since I was mining data, I had the question and I had the database downloaded. How many times has Bluebell been inspected? Now, there are only, my understanding, and I could be wrong because I have not, I did not dive deep into this enough to answer my own question. My understanding is that there are only 3 manufacturing facilities, the Oklahoma, Alabama, and Texas facilities, but many of these inspections that are listed here, and I won't go through the numbers with you, but this is the 2022 to the 2024 database of inspections that I downloaded. Many of these are not these facilities. Many of these are other facilities under the ownership of Bluebell. And so think of distribution centers, think of transfer centers, and these other facilities are getting inspected as well. Also note in 2014, Bluebell facilities were inspected 15 times. And then in terms of the inspection of the 3 Bluebell facilities, the 3 facilities were inspected 1 week apart, and then they returned the end of March of 2015 to the beginning of May. This is the current outbreak of ice cream that is associated with a current outbreak of listeriosis that is associated with Big Olaf ice cream. Big Olaf is manufactured in Sarasota, Florida. I should say was manufactured in Sarasota, Florida. The picture that I have here of the fast facts comes directly from the CDC website. This is publicly available. And the last posted update was August 4th. So this data has not changed on the CDC website since August 4th. And we have in this current outbreak, 25 cases. 24 of the 25 were hospitalized. There was one death, as I noted, from a woman in Illinois. And then in my bullet points, I have the additional fetal loss. There was a miscarriage at 11 weeks of a woman who she and her husband had traveled to Florida. They had ice cream. She returned home. She was hospitalized. She miscarried. So we have the fetal loss there as well. I'll show you the map of the states, and this definitely is a recall. So very different map compared to the map from Bluebell Ice Cream. And again, this is CDC data that is publicly available. And we have the number of people going on the y-axis going all the way up to 4 here. And then our first date on the far left-hand corner is January of 2021. And so similar to what we saw with the Bluebell outbreak, there were these individual cases. There was a pair of cases in that would be September of 2021. And then we get to 2022. And so now we have months where there are 3, 3, 3, 4, the 1, and then 4. And so obviously something has happened. And these can be matched through PulseNet at the CDC, where they can show that this same isolate from these, I don't know if this all adds up to 25, but 25 cases, that it is virtually the same microorganism. And this would be done by when they do an investigation like this, they would put each of those patient isolates through whole genome sequencing. And they would be very closely matched with whole genome sequencing. And this map is of interest. Florida has the highest number at 13, and that's because the ice cream was manufactured in Sarasota, Florida, and so you would expect that. And then in the investigation of people who have the same Listeria infection, but outside of Florida, they have reported that they went to Florida and had ice cream. And so there's a strong correlation with travel to Florida from these other states. And that's the type, this is the type of data that you can follow on the CDC website to see where the outbreak is occurring. In terms of the epidemiological data for the Big Olaf, we have sick people range in age from less than 1 to 92 years. Of the 25 people, 24 were hospitalized. The death of the woman in Illinois, she was not pregnant. And then there actually were 5 people, who were pregnant, and 1 had a fetal loss. Okay, I have to go a little bit faster. I'm going to talk a little bit faster here. When you think about Listeria, I want you to think about Listeria coming in the door of your facility. We say that Listeria is ubiquitous. It's not omnipresent, but that means it could be in the raw milk if you're receiving raw milk, in the particulates, which are going to be added post-pasteurization to your ice cream, the air, the people. We know that Listeria thrives in a cold and wet processing environment. And so any dripping pipes, any condensate that is collected has the potential for Listeria to be in it and then moving into an area wherever that water is going to. And then if you think about your processing area, what is proximate to that area where there could be contamination and there could be the cross-contamination from adjacent areas? When we look at control of Listeria, we first of all get a facility layout and we apply hygienic zoning. Zone 4 is farthest away from the food itself, and zone 1 is food contact surfaces. In both Canada and the United States, we have a guidance document for the control of Listeria monocytogenes in ready-to-eat foods. This is so important that I did give you, the web address. So right underneath FDA guidance document, I don't know if you can highlight that, but anyway, if you are in the ice cream and frozen novelty industry, I highly encourage you to get this document, read this document. I use it as a guidance for my work with clients. My last bullet is pointing out that there are 2 flow diagrams. One is for Listeria species being found on food contact surfaces, and one is for Listeria species being found on non-food contact surfaces. Because it's a guidance document, you do not have to do exactly what the FDA says, but know that this is the current thinking and therefore the current expectation of FDA, and then any justification as to why you are not following it needs to be reasoned. And I would definitely have that conversation with your food safety team. Listeria species method may be considered an indicator test for both food contact surfaces and non-food contact surfaces. So some of my colleagues do not like doing Listeria species testing on food contact surfaces. It depends. For me, it depends. It depends on the client. It depends on the site as to whether we do Listeria species testing or not. But know that there are both PCR and ELISA qualitative methods looking for the presence of any Listeria species in the Listeria species test. What is absolutely critical for you is to, whatever test you're using, whatever manufacturer of the test is being used at the third-party laboratory, make sure you know what they test for. Understand the DNA that's being tested in the PCR test, understand the ELISA reactions, so that you know for sure how close you're getting to Listeria monocytogenes in these tests. There is the opportunity for your third-party lab to stop at the step in testing, which would give you a presumptive positive, and therefore you would not have, in normal routine work, you would not have to go to a confirmed positive test, because it really wouldn't matter for your corrective action. If your corrective action is taken on a presumptive positive, as if it were to confirm out, that's what it's all about. FDA doesn't mind that you get positives for Listeria. What it's all about is the corrective action. What did you do, and how can you prove that the hazard is in control? We know that Listeria monocytogenes is present in our facilities in low numbers, and therefore in our swabbing we may miss it. And we also know that Listeria monocytogenes is non-competitive. So if you think about that drain sample where Listeria might be there might be other Listeria species present that are detected. And it is not important for you to actually go to the point of identifying Listeria monocytogenes from a drain sample, unless it's a recall investigation. That's a different world. And so your corrective action is going to be taken on that presumptive. It's all about sanitation in terms of control of Listeria monocytogenes. Do you have a facility sanitarian? I encourage you to observe sanitation. I encourage you to review cleaning and sanitizing parameters to make sure that it's effective. I encourage you to make sure that your sanitation crew has enough resources to do the job correctly, including point of use water temperature, water pressure, enough personnel, and enough time. Then in terms of our environmental monitoring program, which is EMP, the key point here, an environmental monitoring program is verification of a sanitation preventive control. Developing a robust environmental monitoring program is absolutely critical, and do know that your FDA inspector will probably ask you for the data. if you have the ability to do a risk assessment project, I highly encourage you to do that, to understand the conditions within your facility. So this is not just for new commissioning of a facility, but also over time as you're manufacturing in the same facility. Do you really know if there is Listeria monocytogenes in your facility or the potential to be in your facility? When I do a risk assessment project, it's a minimum of 100 sponges. If we could do 200 or 300, that would be awesome. I have a colleague that has this saying that we're going to swab the snot out of a facility, and that's what you need to do. All of your traffic patterns, all of the potential places where Listeria monocytogenes might be coming into your facility and then being tracked through your facility is part of a risk assessment. We focus on zone 3 and zone 4 for risk assessments, not so much on zone 1 or zone 2, but absolutely make sure that you're testing every single drain within your facility, every single threshold. So the floor, the door, the structure of the doorway, going into packaging and your production areas. Okay, so this is the really scary slide, and I know I'm coming up on my time. I just want you to know that I will be hanging out here longer than the top of the hour for anybody who has an immediate question, and I also will be giving you my email address to contact me as well. So for Listeria speciation, remember there are 26 different species. There may be more in the future, who knows? One of the things that we have looked at in the past is the ability of Listeria monocytogenes to perform or to produce hemolysin. So that hemolysin can be seen on blood agar as a clearing of the agar. But more importantly, in terms of the illness, it's a virulence factor. And it is because of that hemolysin that cells are destroyed. So think about the Listeria being in the intestine, cells being destroyed, the Listeria getting into the blood system, the circulatory system, cells being destroyed, and then landing at other locations within the body. The second bullet is the wonderful talk that was given by Dr. Martin Wiedemann from Cornell at IFP this year in Pittsburgh. And he reported on whole genome sequence findings of not only Listeria monocytogenes having the hemolysin, but Listeria inocua having a hemolysin as well. In addition to talking about the hemolysin, the production of the hemolysin, he was talking about another virulence factor. It is the gene that is listed there in the parentheses, and it is specific for the ability of a Listeria cell to attach to the intestinal lining. So as the live cell is consumed with the food, passes through the stomach, goes into the intestine, no illness will develop unless the Listeria has the ability to attach to the intestine. And according to Dr. Wiedemann, a significant percentage, something like 30% of Listeria monocytogenes that he's looked at do not have that gene. So just by isolating Listeria monocytogenes from your environment, from a product, does not mean that that Listeria has the ability to cause the illness, listeriosis. And that's pretty mind-blowing at this time. So if I've blown your mind and you want to talk more, if you are seeing some red flags and you need help, please reach out to our EAS consultants for things like preparation for an inspection or an audit, review of those sanitation SOPs, review and development of your environmental monitoring program to include what would you designate for your hygienic zoning, creation of your master site list, the rotation of that list, the frequency of testing, being able to answer the question, am I taking enough samples? If you're asking that question, you probably are not. The environmental monitoring program is if it is robust and doing what it's supposed to be doing, is intensive. Choosing the method. Do you want to go with PCR? Do you want to go with ELISA? This is my contact information. I am going to leave it there. And I get to look at the chat box now. Autoimmune disorder. Thank you.
And just to let everybody on the call know, this presentation is being recorded, and we will follow up with everybody with a link to access the presentation through the EAS website.
I'm going to answer the question from Stephanie. Thank you. She would like to know more about why a facility would choose to not go through confirmation. So I would choose to not go through confirmation when it is routine testing. So if you have an environmental monitoring program, which includes testing for Listeria species, and my recommendation is before you ever take a sample, certainly before you ever send a sample of a site to a lab for testing, know what your corrective action is going to be. And if your corrective action can be implemented with a presumptive positive, then I do not recommend going through confirmation, basically because it doesn't matter. If you pick up the presence of Listeria species, there may be Listeria monocytogenes there may not be Listeria monocytogenes there, but we know that the conditions are conducive for Listeria monocytogenes. And so our corrective action is about cleaning that up, eliminating the pathogen, and then limiting the spread of cross-contamination throughout your facility. In investigational purposes, that's completely different. And so we usually go to confirmation at that point because we're in a situation where there already is the company is already in a recall, and they can go ahead and confirm whether or not it's Listeria monocytogenes. And the part of that answer is to repeat is we know that Listeria monocytogenes out in our environment, such as in drains, are present in low numbers, so we might miss them, and are non-competitive, so the other species may predominate both in the environment and in testing. And so if we find any Listeria at all, it's a reason to initiate corrective action. I see we have a lot of questions. We're not going to have enough time to answer all of these questions. I just see the 30% of Listeria popping out at me. Dana, Dr. Martin Weidman at Cornell University. Look at his work. Is the root cause of the 22 ice cream outbreak known? I was not able to find anything in my search. And one of the things that I did not say about the current 2022 ice cream outbreak and recall is that the Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services did issue a stop production order, and they issued a stop sale order as well. The environmental data from that is that 9 of 100 or more environmental samples were positive for Listeria monocytogenes from the facility, and 16 out of 17 varieties of ice cream were positive for Listeria monocytogenes. And then Jessica emailed the PDF of the PowerPoint. So you should have that in your email.
We'll follow up with everybody again just to send it one more time linked instead of an attachment.
Thank you.
Of course. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. I think Kathy may hang on for another few minutes just to check some questions. Otherwise, her contact information is up on the screen, You can email her at Knutson@certifiedgroup.com, and she will be able to answer all of your questions. And we thank you very much for joining us today.
Just reading through the questions to see if there's any quick ones I can answer. I know most people have jumped off already, but the third line here for the control of Listeria slide is the web address for the FDA document. And then when you go to the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, their title is similar to this title as well. And there's also a couple of questions about like how many samples to take and to include zone 4. So I definitely include zone 4 because we want to go with the concept that Listeria is coming into the facility, and then it's just a matter of stopping it before it gets to production and packaging. And in terms of the number, that is a great question that only by working through your plan can you figure out how many sites you need to be swabbing and the number of swabs you need to be taking. And that is part of developing your master site list and looking at the rotation of your list, looking at the frequency of testing. It's not easy. It is a formidable task to set your mind to. And it's constantly evolving as well. As you learn that certain areas have great control, you can back off on the swabbing. As you find the pathogen, then you intensify your swabbing in that area. And I do recommend, there's a question about the dry snack mix. I do recommend that all facilities test for Listeria, and I would start with all your drains because all things go to the drain, and the drain is a conducive environment for Listeria monocytogenes. So start there, just swab all of your drains and then see if you find it. But then otherwise, other than drains, it would be the thresholds into your production and packaging areas and the more zone 4, high traffic zone 4 areas, maybe your break room, maybe the hand wash area, those types of areas. Hey, Jessica, I think I'm done with my additional comments.
Okay, that sounds great. Again, thank you everybody for joining. Kathy and I are both here if you have any further questions. We will be following up with everybody who registered for the event with the slide handout training materials, as well as a recording to access the video or the recording of our training through the EAS website. So thank you all very much, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Have a great afternoon.